Hi, I'm Martha Teichner, and with me today is Scott Silven, who will be doing the journey. And our journey today will be a little bit like the journey of his production, but you're going to get a little bit of a peek behind the scenes. But first, welcome, Scott.
It is great to be
And,
with you today, Martha.
and first of all, there are magicians, there are mentalists, there are illusionists. What are you?
It is a very good question to start the interview. So I am an illusionist. My specialism is mentalism. So the press like to call me an illusionist and a mentalist. And really what a mentalist is that you are using people's thoughts and memories and emotions and creating impossible experiences from them. So that's my specialism in illusion. It's what my North Star has been for the past few years.
How is that different than being a magician?
I think what a magician would do when we think of a magician is it's more traditional sleight of hand tricks or tricks that maybe involve props. And you're creating the illusions from those. Whereas mentalism is taking something ethereal, people's thoughts and memories, and carving out an impossible experience from them. So there's aspects of mentalism in which you're using traditional magic techniques, but you're weaving that with psychological techniques to create the experiences that I do now.
Now, is the storytelling aspect of your shows, is that the key, or is the storytelling the stepchild of the illusions, or are the illusions the stepchild of the storytelling, or is it all the same thing?
I think initially when I was starting out, I was very much focused on the illusions and using the illusions as metaphors for something greater. And I realized pretty early on that attaching a story or a narrative to these illusions bolstered the experience. It made it more emotive. It allowed the audience to connect with it much more than just witnessing these impossible experiences in isolation. So I was about 15 or 16 years old when I started attaching a storytelling element to my shows. Initially, it was personal stories, the things that inspired me. And then in recent years, I've moved on to telling greater tales or longer narrative pieces in which the illusions are woven throughout.
How did you get started? I mean, when did you find out that you wanted to be an illusionist?
Of course, I didn't know something like this could exist. And I'm still amazed today that it does exist as my career. But I was about 6 years old, and my granddad took a little piece of candy that I had signed my name on, and he vanished it. And it appeared in a matchbox on the coffee table. And he told me the secret. It was deeply disappointing, Martha. But I realized pretty quickly that there's something amazing about taking these everyday objects and creating this impossible experience from it. And secondly, me growing up in Scotland, it's a place where myth and mystery is such a big part of its identity. And I grew up near those sort of landscapes and forests of Scotland that inspired that sense of wonder in me. So I had these two paths, both mysticism of Scotland and the stories of Scotland is a nation of storytellers, and my grandfather teaching me these two illusions. And they sort of coalesced, and I realized that this is what I wanted to do. It was a few years where of learning simple magic tricks. I realized pretty quickly that he only knew two or three tricks, and I had to search for other avenues to learn my illusions. So going to libraries and magic shops and gathering as much details as I could. And it was when I was about 13 or 14 that I studied psychology, and then realized I could study contemporary performance at university.
Now, did you, when you're a kid, people say, well, what are you going to be when you grow up? What did you say?
I think I unbelievably did say I want to be an illusionist, much to my mum's chagrin. She wasn't quite sure exactly what that was going to be.
Did she say, oh,
But
well, maybe you could study medicine or accounting or something a little less unusual?
indeed, unusual is a very polite word to choose as well. But she felt that way. Luckily, she was always very supportive of what I did and loved what I did as well. I think I was a great party guest whenever she had her friends around and I could show them some things. But for me, I looked at what other magicians were doing. And maybe often the image we have of a magician is someone who does the wedding or the bar mitzvah or the birthday party. And I realized that that didn't really interest me, that I wanted to take audiences into a space and share a story and hopefully inspiring experience with them. I couldn't quite define where that existed in the illusion realm, because most of the shows I'd seen didn't follow that path. It was very trick heavy. So it wasn't until I started studying contemporary performance and I got these skills of directing and acting and dramaturgy that I realized that I could create these experiences myself. So it was in that realm that I said, okay, I think an illusionist is a good title to use.
When you were figuring out what to study, it's my understanding you also studied hypnosis.
That's right. Yeah. I was 15 and I realized there was a hypnosis course in Milan. And I didn't tell my mom. I told her there was a school trip to London, which was going to be a week long, and I was going to have to go on this school trip. She said, "That's great." She knew I was leaving the house, and I got the bus from where was living at the time, in the west of Scotland. Got the bus to London, then the bus to Paris through the Eurotunnel, and then we drove we drove to Milan, overboard, and then I stayed there for a week and came back from that experience with these strange skills of hypnosis that I could add to my arsenal of effects. And it wasn't until I started doing press interviews like this that my mum realized many years later that I had taken this trip to Milan. I completely forgot to tell her. But I think when people think of
Deliberately
hypnosis,
forgot to tell her.
indeed. She's still not forgiven me for it as well. But I think, when people think of hypnosis, there's a great fear, isn't there? There's a loss of control, or that you're making someone fall asleep and you're making them do, humorous things. And that wasn't the aspects of hypnosis that interested me. What interested me was that you can take someone and put them in a state where they are very susceptible and very open to new information, and that you can relax people. So there's never any very overt hypnosis in my shows. That aspect of it doesn't interest me. But there is hypnotic techniques that allows the story to resonate perhaps a little bit deeper, or allows people to open up a little bit more in terms of sharing a particular emotion or memory as part of the experience.
What tell us about the show, the journey. Give us a kind of an overview, because I've done it and taken part in it, but nobody else here has necessarily,
Yeah.
because it hasn't opened its boleto yet.
Yeah, it's a natively online experience where I invite 30 people from Charleston to travel virtually across the world to my home in Scotland. And we really go on an adventure together that explores the power of home and place and connection in fragmented times. And we use their memories and emotions as the guide on that journey. So the audience physically enter the space in a virtual realm where we project the audience onto the walls of my home. And whenever I want to speak with you or interact with you, we pull you from the walls as a hologram into the space, and we give a very natural and engaging conversation. So it's a piece where I really share the power of me coming back to Scotland after being a long time on tour. I usually do about 450 to 500 shows a year across the world. And I was brought back to Scotland in the pandemic, thinking I would be back here for 2 or 3 weeks just to see family, and I'm still I'm still here a year later. So that's really how the show came about, and it's
What
this
did you?
wonderful.
How many shows did you cancel?
We cancelled close to 500 shows that would have. We're usually booking a year or two in advance, and I have a pretty tight schedule where I'm doing 8 to 12 shows a week in different states, and then further afield. So we knew pretty quickly. I think I was in Seattle when the pandemic first hit. I just came from Sydney, arrived in Seattle. I was meant to be in Seattle for a couple of months doing a long run there, and realized that we were going to have to postpone the Seattle shows. And I thought at that time, this is a really wonderful opportunity to go back to Scotland and see my family that I haven't seen for a year. And I'm sure we'll be back on tour in the summer. And within a few weeks of coming back, as I think we all realized, that this wasn't going away as quickly as we thought it would. So initially, my idea wasn't making a show, but I just entered this really reflective place where I was back in my childhood home. that I hadn't spent much time in over the past decade, surrounded by all these objects of meaning to me, items that inspired what I do today. And I thought, this, as difficult as this experience is for everyone, there is something incredibly profound and powerful about it. It allows us a moment to reflect and look upon our own lives and take a deep breath. And that's really where the show came from.
And how did you put it together? How long did it take? What did you were normally living in New York City, but all of a sudden you're marooned in Scotland. What about your production team and all of that? I mean, give me a sense of you're locked in your family home. Now what?
Yeah, I felt all of those things in the first few weeks of where do I go from here? You know, my creative team and usual production team are all in different parts of the world. No one can travel. Everything that I do is interactive and immersive. I just thought whatever I do is not going to work in this format. So I set myself a goal where I said, if I'm going to do a show, it has to be a show like something that has not existed in this digital world before. It has to use new and inspiring technology that allows the audience to feel as if they're really engaging in a truly immersive experience, as you would do if you come to one of my live shows. So I spoke to my production designer, the wonderful Jeff Zog. Jeff is an amazing, acclaimed Broadway designer. He did Charlie and the Chocolate Factory on Broadway. He's just recently been nominated for a Tony for his work in Tina, the musical. He thinks in a very different way. And you can present him with impossible challenges, and he succeeds in those challenges. So I knew if I had him on board with this project, we would hopefully be able to create wondrous things together. So amazingly, he was able to travel to Scotland just before the full lockdown took place. He was actually doing a show in the National Theatre in London at the time, so he still had a visa for the UK. So serendipitously, we got him in the country about July period. And we got him into my home and we started to build out the show here. And then other members of the creative team, we were able to interact with remotely and begin to build out the show from there. And it's as you would expect, as it would be in a live show. We have a director, we have a sound designer, we have sound engineers, we have a composer, production designer. All those people were just existing in the online space. So it was a very fast turnaround from that point, where we had about a 6 to 8 week period before we began opening for previews for the show, which was in August time. And because we were building completely custom technology that hasn't existed before, we were beset with the enormous challenges on a day-to-day basis. I've shared with people before that the night we opened for previews, we invited the 30 audience into the space. They appeared on my walls, and then all 30 of the audience members just vanished into the internet somewhere. It's probably the most amazing illusion I've done in this entire run, actually. And I think that was the great challenge for me. Is usually my focus in creating a show is I have the time to think of the narrative and the illusions and what I want the performance to be. Where this was an experience where 80% of our time was spent in building this technology, and the time that we had for the technology was working, we would spend on the narrative and creative aspects of the performance. So a completely new, different, and deeply challenging experience for me. It amazes me every day that we've still been able to do it, and we're able to invite people from across the world into my home every night. To me, it feels like real magic, genuinely, every single evening, as soon as I see the audience on the walls appearing into the space. So yes, we previews in August, and then we opened in September.
I was going to say that I suppose there are probably people who say, well, if you're using all the technology, that at some level you can fool people more easily. But I'm not sure that that's the case. Which is harder, when you're live and there aren't any pyrotechnics, there's just you in a space, or this, and how do you make this believable?
Yeah, I think that was my biggest challenge in creating this was, as I say, how do you make this feel like what my live experience would be? Will it ever feel like that? We're so used to logging into YouTube or Netflix and seeing dinosaurs come through walls and people levitate. The things that we see on a screen don't impact us in the same way that things we maybe see live in a theater. So it was really just working, very carefully with my director Ali Butler and Jeff, to make sure that the camera angles that we used appear as innocently as they possibly can, and that it almost feels like a live documentary that you're witnessing, that there is no cutaways whenever an illusion is taking place. And secondly, that almost every audience member gets a chance to participate in the show, because I think you're always the biggest skeptic until you get to take part in an illusion yourself and you realize that you have impacted the experience. But we're walking a very fine tightrope in what we're doing, because it's a very technologically advanced show. As I say, we have holograms, we have projection mapping throughout the room that immerses the audience into the story. Things that they wouldn't have seen in the online world before, but then we have these illusions running alongside it. The feedback I've had from audience members is that thankfully they do believe what they were seeing. There's nothing nefarious, happening off screen, or no strange camera cutaways. So I'm really pleased that it's worked out.
I understand you can take us. You can't tell it. There's the perennial question: how does he do it when you do amazing things? You can't. I know you're not going to tell me how you do it, but you can see a little bit of the way it's done. Could you take us on a little behind-the-scenes tour?
Of course, I'd be delighted to. So obviously, this is the show space that I'm in right now. We'll cut to our second camera here. So what the audience will see when they come into the show is essentially this. This is the performance space, minus the laptop, and we've got projection mapping across the entire space here, as you can see. This is genuinely in the living room of my house. It's the real world outside. It's not a studio or a set, as people often think it is. And this is what you'll see for the majority of the show. This is where I enter the experience, and then we open the show over here. And what the audience don't see is how I interact with you throughout the performance. The first thing I have is a confidence monitor right up here that lets me see what's going on in the experience. And then we have a robotic camera right here. Because we're working in a COVID-safe environment, we can only have one camera person in the space. So we have multiple robotic cameras that can shift and move throughout the performance, creating limitless different angles that would usually require a multi-person tech team. Then I have a big confidence monitor right here that lets me see what the audience are doing throughout the show. It gives me a good idea of who I think I want to pick for particular illusions, that I can watch them throughout the experience. And then we have a third confidence monitor just over here, as well as a second robotic camera. And as I say, we move these in our control space throughout the performance. So we have about 20 or 30 different camera angles set up. So when you're watching the show, it feels as if the cameras are everywhere, immersing you in the experience, but we really only have 3 live cameras. The most interesting thing is these projectors right here. These projectors are built for Broadway houses. They're usually for 2,500, 3,000 seat theaters. We have 3 of them in a space that is about 5 meters width, which is kind of strange. So Jeff Sugg was able to arrange those for us. We have a very simple lighting rig you can see as well. Most of the lighting comes from the projections in the space, but all of this is freestanding because we've genuinely built this in the lounge of my home. I can take you out. We have some drapes right here, but to give you a sense of how small the space is, this is my kitchen right here, which is just next to the performance space. So I prepare my coffee. Thank you. Prepare our coffee, and then I can come straight in and do the show. So it's the first time we've done this, obviously, because this is our final week of shows with Spilato. But it's good to prove to people that it genuinely is happening at a home and not in a studio space. So yeah, there's lots of interesting aspects to it. We have a short segment that we can show you as well that gives you an idea of what happens behind the scenes. So I have a small crew that works in my study area where we've set up a control room, and they are the people who help me pick specific audience members and project them into the space. So maybe we can run that short film right now if that works for you.
That would be fine.
Let's do it.
Hello everyone, I'm Scott Silven. Thank you for joining me. Everything that we experience together tonight is going to be streamed live across the world, travelling a path all the way from my home here in Scotland to yours. You're here tonight to join me on a journey I hope will stay with you long after it's finished. Let's take the first step.
So you
You're
can see
back.
it's a pretty complex setup for a show in my own home. We have all the gadgets here.
Now, is it fair to ask whether the things that seem in the show that are really amazing, the coincidences between the audience members and the story and you, are those possible because of all that technology, or is that still you doing illusions?
It's really just me doing the illusions, and I think that was the key thing for me is all those aspects that you see backstage really just are there to allow the audience to be in the space with me and to pull them from the walls into the room of the show. For me, finding the impossible coincidence between the audience members, that's me doing as I would do in a live experience, choosing the right people, guiding their decisions, using my traditional magic techniques to create the experience. That we can try something now, for example, to give you a sense of what that would be.
Well, try something on me.
Okay. So obviously we haven't set anything up. I think that's fair to say. But
No, we have not set up anything.
if I think back to specific moments in my life, specific years that stand out to me, the first year that stands out to me is 1992. And that is when I was just a little kid growing up in Scotland. I started this task that I speak about during the show, where I would collect stones from places I'd visited, and I'd carve something on the stone as a reminder of where I'd been. Or I'd fold up a little piece of paper and hide a message underneath the stone as a reminder of that experience that I had. I've always been fascinated by that idea of capturing memories and holding on to them in some way. And I remember you were speaking to me about just before the show about how you found knitting needles from when you were a very young person from many, many years ago. And it took you right back to that moment. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to think back now to a specific moment of time in your life, a year that really stands out to you. And you can circle through a few different years inside your head. And once you have one, you can just share that year with the audience. What was the year that you were focused on?
1977.
1977. Now, obviously, that year is personal to you. I'm not going to ask you to share the details of why that year was important for you. If you had to distill that memory in that year to one word, trust your instincts. What word feels right to you, Martha?
Career.
Career, yes. Career. So that's 1977 and career. Two things that stand out to you. Now, you probably circled through a few different years inside your head as well, didn't you, before you settled on 1977? What do you think made you say 1977?
Because it was a singular year in my career development.
I see. Remember I told you that I used to take little messages and I would hide them in stones? You probably noticed throughout the time we've been speaking here, I've had this little stack of stones right here. You probably noticed before we began the interview as well that I actually placed something inside one of this stack of stones. I don't know if you can see this. It's a little piece of paper on the stack of stone here. And I wrote down two things. It was a year, 1977, and the word career.
That's amazing.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you.
Wow.
That gives you a sense of what happens during the show, that it's not camera tricks or funny angles. It's really just people connecting and sharing in that experience together.
Do you believe in telepathy?
I don't, but there's aspects of telepathy and of neurolinguistic programming that I do find interesting and I do use during the show. But the idea of people being psychic, I, of course, as an illusionist, I'm the biggest skeptic. I've never tried to convince people that magic is real. But I think that's the least interesting aspect of magic, isn't it? It's really
Why?
taking the audiences on that journey of mystery. I think we live in a time where everything is so easily explained and quantified. And for me, what's most interesting about mystery is that walk in the dark, that walk into the unknown. It ignites the senses. It allows us to look at the world in a different way and reminds us of the limitless possibilities that are available to us. That's always been my focus in what I do today.
What is it, do you think, about human nature where, on the one hand, we're always trying to solve problems, answer questions, as you suggested, but we all want to be carried along by magic, by illusion, and so on, just as I was moments ago.
It's true. We're pulled in two different directions, isn't it? I think it's because the greatest mystery, of course, is ourselves and our own lives and the direction that may take. And we spend all of our lives searching for answers to the unknown. That's why you study. That's why you have a career. That's why you choose to have a family and do the job that you want to do. You're searching for answers constantly. But to be taken to a moment where there is no answer and you were taken to the edge of the precipice of reality and you just get a chance to peek over and see something impossible, just for a brief moment in time, it excites you. And it reminds you of the wonder of the world and the fact that you are here and now and you can choose what you want to do in your life. And that for me is the most powerful aspect of magic. It's not trying to trick people or, as I say, convince people that magic is real, but it's us going in this journey together for a moment in time, realizing that impossible things exist out there. And if I can do the impossible, you can do the impossible. And I think that's the great thing about this show, is that it hopefully is inspiring for people in a challenging time.
There are studies that have demonstrated that people love to be scared. They like scary movies. They like dangerous roller coasters. They like all kinds of situations where they can scream and they come out very happy because they've had this scare. Is magic, is illusion that kind of thing, or is it something different?
I think it definitely walks a very similar path to that, because the great idea of fear is, of course, the unknown of what is possible and out there. I think it's more related to the idea of wonder rather than the idea of the unknown. And we're taken to a place of wonder when we experience the unknown, but it's inspiring in some way, that we are overwhelmed, that we don't have the faculties to find the links in terms of how that works. So that's always been my North Star, really, is that eternal search for wonder and to reawaken wonder in people as well. We all have that within ourselves. We've all had that from childhood, when you look at the world with completely open eyes and don't question everything.
Now, when in the journey, there are a lot of references to childhood, and there's a child who is part of the story, as well as you were a child at one point and relating to the place and so on. What does childhood have to do with our love for illusion and magic and the fact that it doesn't go away when we grow up?
I think for some people it does go away. And I find that very often with people at my shows. The reason that people very often come to my shows is that they've lost their search for wonder, that they have, been driven down by their job or their life that they've led, and they became too focused and too insular in themselves, when they forget to look outwards and see the world around them. So I think very often we get that aspect of people coming to the show and experiencing it. But secondly, as I say, it really is that childlike search for wonder that I have always had that within myself as a little kid. I think you've had that within yourself as well, that you stay with you. The reason the theme is so prescient for me now is me just returning back to my childhood home as well. I think it's why I wanted to explore it, particularly for this show. The story of Callie, the other child you've spoken about in the show, is a sort of mythical reference to a person in Scotland, and my own childhood, and those two stories coalescing. So yeah, I feel for some people, childhood does hold importance and resonance to them, and for other people, they're searching for it. They can't easily go back to that moment in time. And hopefully the illusions allow them that moment to reflect and go back and find something inspiring from that moment in time that inspires their future.
Was it harder to do a convincing show online the way you're doing it, even with all that technology to support what you're doing, than when you're in a room doing, for example, at the Illusionist Table, where you're in the presence of people who are eating and drinking, and the illusions are related to all of that, and the storytelling?
Yeah. I think from a perspective of building an audience energy and building rapport with an audience, it is much more difficult in this environment. I think we've all experienced, this type of interview or conversation or anything we do in our jobs is much more challenging than being in a room with the person and reading those subtle signals that we pick up on in a conversation. So that for me has been a huge challenge, especially with the type of work that I do. You referenced at the Illusionist Table. It's an intimate dining experience of 30 people where all of those 30 people are involved in the performance and connected in the experience, driving it through to the end. And there's a very strong connection to why I chose 30 people for this show. We could have had 50 people or 100 people for this show, but I knew that 30 would work, even in this format, because every single person gets a chance to be involved, or at least see someone that they know being involved in the experience, being agents of the experience. So that's helped slightly. But something as simple as having an audience applaud in this format is incredibly challenging. What does it mean to me? It means we have to unmute 30 audiences' mic feeds. We have to make sure there's no feedback. We have to make sure that it doesn't relay into my mic. So all these natural moments that exist in a live performance, we have had to calibrate and curate and quantify in the show. And that for me has felt really strange in the development of this show, because we all know that thrill of live performance, of when an audience gets elated and you feel the energy in the space. With this show, we've had to mark those moments a little more directly. So that's taken a period of adjustment for me. And I'm very much looking forward to going back to the live performance aspect where that isn't as quantified. On the other hand, in doing the show in this online format has afforded new ways of connecting with the audience that I wouldn't otherwise be able to do. As you experienced when you came to the show, we asked the audience to bring a physical object of meaning with them from their home. There's something very powerful about people being in their own homes, taking part in a show that I really wanted to capitalize on. So everyone brings an object of meaning with them that potentially has the chance of being used during the show. We send the audience advanced content before they come to the show as well. 2 short films and a binaural sound experience. What I've tried to do at the Illusionist Table, it's a multi-sensory experience where we're stimulating all the senses with food and drink and scent as part of the illusions. So initially in creating this show, I was like, what works in an online format? 1, it has to be visual. 2, you have to play with what the audience are hearing in some way as well. So by providing that advanced content, 2 short films and this binaural sound experience, which audience members have maybe not experienced before, a binaural sound experience, when you listen to it in your headphones, it's got this strange surround sound quality where it feels like I'm in the room with you. And if you close your eyes, it feels as if I'm whispering in one ear and then can walk behind you and whisper in your other ear. It's very strange and trippy, but it's hopefully a fun thing to experience before you come to the show.
So that's a pointer to do it with proper earphones.
Yes. We only have a few simple requests to come to the show. That is 1, wear headphones. 2, bring an object of meaning with you. And number 3, bring a piece of paper and a pen. And that's all you need to go on the journey with me. But those advanced aspects of the show and the idea of physically asking the audience to bring something with them, to do that in a live theater would be a little convoluted and unlikely that most audience members would be able to do that as well. And for me, having that in the online format, it seems like a once in a lifetime experience to me to be able to create illusions involving people's own objects.
When you create a show, when you created this show, did you start with the illusions and work back to the story, or did you start with the story and work to the illusions, or did you start with the technology and say, oh, what could we do?
Well, in a live environment, usually I will start with the story. That's the North Star. That's the most important part that the audience will interact with. And then you create specific illusions that resonate with that story. Much more difficult to create illusions first and then try and shoehorn them into a narrative. With this format, the online format, we had so many competing paths that we had to overcome. The number one aspect of the show was the technology, first of all. Is it possible to get the audience in the room with me? Is it possible to turn audience members into a hologram and have a natural conversation with me? Once we overcame those hurdles, and we were still beating those hurdles every day right up until we opened, I began to create this story around that. And then the final aspect of that was fitting the illusions into it. The great challenge with this show is because we had no idea whether the technology would work, I was having to change moments of the illusions right up until we opened. Even in the first few weeks of opening and previews, there was a lot of major shifts in the show in terms of how I interact with the audience. A big challenge for me as well is most of the techniques that I use are built to work in a live setting and not, where I can see you and speak with you and ask you to hold something or interact with something in an online format was way more convoluted. So I had to rethink the type of illusions that I would usually do. So the illusions that you see in this show are hopefully something you haven't seen in the online realm before. You certainly will have never seen in my live shows before. Everything is completely new.
It's got to be hard, though, given that everybody has sat through zillions of endless Zoom calls for the past year and a half. And yes, they're better than nothing, but it just, we're at the point where the idea of another Zoom performance is not exactly breathtaking. And you have to break through that because the whole nature of the show relates to that technology.
You're completely right. And I think, when I started working in this show last spring, even at that point, a month into the pandemic, I was done with Zoom. I didn't want to have any more meetings over Zoom. And I knew at that point, I don't want this to be a Zoom show. I don't want this to be lots of people in tiny boxes and me trying to interact with them in strange ways, and people having to mute and unmute their mics and make their screen bigger and smaller. What we've done with this show is we have taken all of those aspects out of the audience's hands and we just immerse them in the experience and engage them in the story. So I've said it before, but I really truly believe that the audience, if they come to this show, will see something that they will have never experienced in the online or digital realm before. Not just with the technological aspects, but the way that they are agents in the experience. They are driving the performance forward. They're not watching a performer on screen deliver a monologue. You are part of that journey. You go on that journey with me on the night that you choose to come. You see yourself and family and friends physically in the space. You see yourself become a hologram and have an actual conversation with me. All these things, I hope, transcend the show from what we expect a digital show to be or what we expect a Zoom show to be, and allow the audience to see a new form of digital theater. Hopefully something that guides what the future of the digital theater can be as well.
Now, I took part in it when you did it at Purdue. And I found it absolutely convincing. And then I watched a video of it several times, and it's different but the same, and it works. And no matter how I try, I can't begin to figure out how you do it. And I'm completely convinced. And do you find that the audiences believe you?
Well, you've had a very rare experience where you've had a recording of the show. I think you're the only person in the world who has a recording of the show. It's
Well,
because I
that's
trust
because
you
I was
now.
preparing for this. But I watched it several times so that I could prepare, so that I could see if it was different from my experience, and so I could remember the details. But
Exactly, yeah.
I never broke through and said, that's how he did it.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know. Yeah, I think there's two things that help the experience, Martha. One is that it's not about this relationship of me versus them as the audience. Like, I'm here to trick you, see if you can work it out. As you hopefully experienced in the show and in the playback, that it's the audience doing the effects themselves. That I'm really just the conduit for the illusions. And no one is forced to take part, but the audience are guided into the space and guided to be part of the illusions. And they find themselves doing these impossible things or providing the information for these impossible things to happen. So I think that really helps more than it being strange props, people in boxes, cards vanishing and reappearing elsewhere, maybe the more traditional tropes that we think of when we think of magic. I think that helps it feel a little more authentic. And secondly, is the very careful way that we've directed this. Yes, it feels like a live television special, and hopefully is the production value of that as well. But we're very careful to use our camera angles, that when I'm presenting an illusion, we don't have any strange cutaways or hidden things going on. And those two things on top of each other, the audience level of engagement and the very clean aesthetic of the show, I think helps the audience be convinced that what they're experiencing is exactly the same as what they would experience if they saw me in the theater.
Now, I know for a fact from having talked to you about this before that not everybody is parked at their desk watching on their laptop in a quiet, dark room.
Yes. I really wish that that could be the case. Initially, when I started this show, I had this grand idea in my head that everyone would quietly have a glass of wine and light some candles and a beautiful internet connection in a well-lit room. Very often we have found that people choose to witness and experience the show and interact with the show in a multitude of different places. Unbelievably, we have had a high proportion of people driving whilst they're watching the show, which boggles my mind. In particular,
that's dangerous.
It's I know it's dangerous, but also very impressive at the same time. But we had a lady when I was in LA. It was my second week of the run, so it was a completely new experience to me. Still getting used to the audience, and this lady was picked for one of the illusions. And I said, "Do you have your objective mini?" She went, "Yeah, it's just right here." And she leaned off screen, and I saw she was sitting in her car, and then came back with a McDonald's drive-through bag and like slushy, big gulp slushy. She was in the McDonald's drive-through at that moment, picking up her order, and that was her objective meeting. So as insane as it was beautifully timed in that moment. She really played it very well, but she revealed her items just as she was selected.
Well, that must have been hard to relate to the overall story.
Yes. We had to quickly move on and obviously not use her object, which was her McDonald's burger, but she helped choose someone else. But we've had lots of experiences like that. We have really lovely things often where there's people outside sitting in a forest or in their garden or sitting by moonlight. It's really lovely to see every evening where people choose to interact with the show.
What is it that you want people to take away from the show? And is it the same thing for all your shows, or does each show have a kind of a thematic takeaway?
I think there's very similar themes that run throughout my shows. That my job is to take the audience to a place of the extraordinary. And by taking them to that place of the extraordinary, allows them to look at their own lives and the world in a different way. It allows them a moment to reflect their own lives. In this show in particular, I think those themes are really prescient just in the world that we're living in right now. We're living in really fragmented times. So whilst Illusionist Table is a show that explores the senses and the power of the senses, the theme of this show is the power of connection in fragmented times, how we all have a desire to reconnect, not just with ourselves, but a sense of wonder. It's my hope that that's what people take away from the show.
Now, in terms of going forward in the future, How will this COVID year and this show, I mean, how many times have you done this show now?
By the time we finish the letter, we'll have done 350 performances, which
Of this,
amazes
of
me.
the journey.
Of the show, The Journey, yeah.
I can't believe that there won't be some kind of reverberation in your future shows in some way. I mean, obviously, when you're free to travel and
Yeah.
perform live again, um, you'll have a different kind of a show. But I wonder what this COVID time and this show have done to your sense of what's next.
Yeah, I think the main thing for me in building this show was realizing how important audience-led interactive experiences are for me as a performer, and that even in this with this impossible task in front of me, where I wasn't able to connect with people, we've been able to build a show that connects people from across the world. So I know that that's going to be my North Star going forward. Secondly, I think there's something really interesting about having a digital audience in a live space where you perhaps mix a part digital audience and part live audience, that you have an audience in one part of the world and an audience live in a space interacting together and creating the impossible together. That's something I really want to explore going forward. And the biggest thing for me is seeing people's desire to connect from across the world in impossibly fragmented times has really highlighted the importance of that theme to me. The importance of people wanting to experience the extraordinary and connect with themselves. That I know in my next project, those are themes that I want to explore at a deeper level.
Just thinking about this, when people are taking part, whether it's digitally or whether it's in person, do they ever lie?
I'm sure they do. Yes. we have some very interesting things where we ask people to choose a year of importance in the show, and you often get husband and wives, and maybe the husband has chosen and they've wrote down the year he was married, and he says, "I'm sure my wife chose the same year," and we pan around the camera, and the wife has chosen a different year that she's wrote down, her first kiss or something from a different guy. And she quickly said, "Oh, well, I was going to write down that year, but I decided to change to something else." But you get that a lot in the show, that we never try and make people feel uncomfortable or not want to share something they don't want to share. It's a really safe space. And I think you've experienced that yourself, that I open up to the audience. If you want to take part, I welcome it. If you don't, you can sit back and just enjoy the journey that we go on together. And I think because there's something really pleasurable about asking people to reflect back in specific moments of their lives that they perhaps haven't thought of for some time, that relaxes people and allows them to be honest. And they see very early on the illusions that I'm creating in the show are not there to berate them or to make a fool out of them. It's really me appreciating them sharing that piece of information and us creating something impossible from it. So I think that helps quell maybe the lying or the mistelling during the show. Secondly, we also ask people just to, if they're speaking about information, we'll ask for that information in advance rather than me just saying, "Think of something. Was this what you're thinking of?" Because then they can often just say, "No, that wasn't what I'm thinking of," when I know it was what they were thinking of. So I have lots of those techniques that I use in my live shows that stops that from happening.
Can you, I mean, I can say from having taken part in this show, when I did it, that it isn't one of those squeamish, "Oh, please don't call on me" kind of things. It's not where you wish you could become invisible. It seems to be a very comfortable, natural kind of thing, even though pretty much the people are complete strangers.
Yeah, I hope so. And that's really something I've tried to create in my own work. Do you know where it comes from? It comes from my place of having great fear in taking part in interactive performances. As a performer myself, I've said this before, that I would never buy a ticket for my shows usually. If I saw how it was written on paper that you're joining people for an intimate dinner party, or you and 30 people are going to go on a virtual journey together, I would find that terrifying. So I know all those reasons that makes that fearful for me are the same reasons that the audience members may be feeling when they enter the space of this show. And I really do try and quell that earlier on. We start the show with the audience taking part in something together. there's a progression in terms of the possibility of the effects that we witness throughout the show as well. And secondly, because the show is really personal to me and they see me opening up, I'm genuinely in my own home as well. That creates a sacredness and safeness to the space that we're experiencing this moment together. It's just for us. It's not being shared with the rest of the world. It's just for us 30 people. And it only exists for this moment in time. And I think audiences really resonate with the specialness of that.
Now, when audiences tune in for a kind of a preview or at the beginning of the show and so on and so forth, they see you striding over the moors. They see stone ruins and so on and so forth. Where are those places in Scotland in reality?
Well, so we filmed the advanced content. That is in Colonsay in Scotland, which I believe you know well. It's a tiny island in the Western Hebrides of Scotland that you are one of the few people that I've met across the world that has heard of Colonsay. It's heard
and
of Colonsay
been
before.
there.
And it's been there, I know, and knows the laird. I find that so peculiar and amazing.
Well, just as an aside, and then I'll let you continue. Yeah. If anyone there's a writer, an American writer named John McPhee, who wrote a book called The Crofter and the Laird many years ago about Colonsay. And when I lived in England, I actually went to Colonsay because I had read that book and had loved it, and got caught in a rainstorm hiking, and a dirty old Volvo came tearing past me, clattered to a stop, backed up, said, "Get in." And I got in out of the rain, and it turned out to be the laird. And and I had all kinds of fun as a result of getting invited to a ceilidh and all kinds of other things.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, so part of it's on Colonsay.
It's really funny that you mentioned that, because my first experience in Colonsay as well was meeting the laird in his old battered pickup truck and being invited to a ceilidh as well. So the islanders must sense the strange new people to the island and invite them to the same activities. But there's only 100 people that live in this island permanently throughout the year. And as you've seen from the advanced content, you'll see it from the trailer, the production shots behind me right now. It is an incredibly historic and mythical place that really captures this moment in time in Scotland. It's kind of amazing that it still exists right now. Beautiful ruins and moors and mountains. And I used to spend a lot of childhood going to Jura and Skye and visiting those places in Scotland, going up for a weekend. And I knew when I came back that this is one of the first places I wanted to visit. And I went there with a friend and just went on a very long walk and thought, wouldn't it be amazing to capture this moment in time that I'm experiencing right now and share that with my audience in an online format? So that was really the seed of the idea, was going on those very long walks in Colonsay. And we have the laird to thank for part of the show, I think, and the ceilidh as well.
So what are you looking forward to going past, or sort of moving past COVID? I mean, I know you are still waiting in Scotland to be vaccinated, but once you're fully vaccinated, are you coming back to the United States? Are you starting to book in-person shows and writing shows for that sometime in the future when it's possible to have them?
I sure am. So yeah, you're right. I'm still to be vaccinated. We're a little behind in Scotland. So fingers crossed next week I get my first vaccination. It's very exciting. I'm performing that night as well, which will make for an interesting show. So as soon as I get that done, the plan is, yes, to head back to the States in the fall. I'm developing my new live show, which is going to be a larger scale proscenium experience that I have been working on for some time. So I'm really excited to spend some time creating that in the fall. And then next year, I start on a new world tour. I open the year at the Sydney Opera House. I'm going to be there with my live show, Wonders at Dusk. And then the hope will be back to North America and pick up where I left off with new live shows running throughout the year.
Have you been able to actually book dates in countries and different locations in different countries, given that there's such an uncertainty?
Yeah, the great challenge when we're booking shows is very often we're working a year or two in advance, as most major theaters are, that they're booking their seasons out. As you know, originally I was going to be coming to Spoleto live, and I've been looking to become Spoleto last year as well. So this shows how long seasons take for something to be booked. So there's always a little bit of readjustment in dates. Luckily, I have really good management and good relationships with the theaters that I've built up with over the years. So we have flexibility to move those dates around a little bit. But it looks like an exciting year next year.
Well, I'm glad that you're able to at least do that, because it could be very difficult if you don't know when it's going to be possible to even
Indeed.
travel. But
It's true.
when do you have a kind of I think I'm going to be on the road starting, say, October, or do you have a kind of a clear-cut launch date, if you will?
Well, the good thing is that this year is once we close the journey, we will be spending some time in development of my new show. So that allows a bit of flexible time and a couple of new projects that I'm working on right now as well. And more information will be released next year. So we have a little bit of flexibility up until the end of this year, where there won't be much live work, public live work in a theater. It will be development and new shows. The hope at that point will be that come 2022, I will be vaccinated. I know Australia is much further ahead than the rest of the UK, so I have some engagements lined up the year that will take me through spring. And then by that point, once I come back to the States, most of the theaters that I work with are hoping that they'll be booking seasons at that point.
Can you give us a
I think,
hint of your next new show? Your first live
yeah,
show?
yeah, it's well, my new show will be it will probably be a year before that show comes to fruition. But as I say, it's a bigger scale experience, audience led, hopefully something that they haven't seen on a proscenium stage before. It's really exciting me, actually. I've in the research I've done, I've not seen anything like it on a world stage before. So we're in the very, very early stages of developing that. I can't even give the title away just yet, but by spring next year, I'll hopefully be touring at the Illusionist Table, an updated version of that show, and my current stage show, Wonders at Dusk, as well. So it'll be really good to get those back on the road again and share those with audiences.
The idea of the proscenium show and those other shows.
Yeah. Yes.
Before I ask about questions, one of the things that interested me is that you say that you were not specifically influenced by other illusionists, magicians, mentalists, and so on. You were influenced by film. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think growing up, I was still am the biggest David Lynch fan, and the way that he creates mysteries in his shows and reveals certain paths for audience to explore and other paths unexplored. I always enjoyed those aspects of Lynch and Hitchcock, and just the aesthetic of those films as well. The mix of light and shadow, the way characters are introduced, the way the story is told from beginning to end, and the non-linear structure. And those are like all the interesting ways that you create an illusion in terms of what you choose to reveal and hide from an audience. So the beats of those films really helped me growing up sort of deliver the aesthetic that I do today. And I hope that what I deliver is quite a unique aesthetic that audiences maybe haven't seen in magic shows before. And certainly the way the story is involved, and the way the set is, and the way that they're involved in the experience. Now, that's not to say that the techniques that I've learned haven't came from other magicians. There is a whole wonderful history of magic that I am indebted to, and techniques that I have been very grateful to learn from some wonderful magicians that I do use in the shows. But in terms of my own creative process, when I build out my shows, I don't look to other magic shows as the way I would create a piece of theater for my audiences. So even now, I'm just watching season 3 of Twin Peaks by David Lynch and getting lots of exciting new ideas for my new show.
I think it's time we see if there are any. There aren't any questions. Amazing. Well, I'm just stunned that there are no questions. Usually there are. I think maybe the uh, the laptop experience has inhibited people, but they'll see the show. Uh, so I think with that, I will. Is there anything else that you think that the audience should know who as they approach the journey?
I think the main thing for me is to approach this show with an open mind and put out of your head what you have experienced in other Zoom shows or digital theater. That this will be something new and exciting that I really hope they will witness as part of Spoleto Festival. I'm excited to see them there.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it, and I
So
can't
lovely
wait till
talking to you.
it's lovely talking to you, and I can't wait till you're back in the United States and I can see a live show.
I can't wait to properly meet you there as well. I'm excited to
Right.
see you soon, hopefully, Martha. Thanks so much.
Thank you.